We were sort of like, why has nobody done this? And we then started to go do research about, is the reason that nobody's done this that it's a fundamentally bad business, like the economics are bad or something like that. And what we found is it's actually a great business to get into. It's just capital intensive. And so to be able to start a business like that, you have to be pretty well capitalized to do it. But margin profile wise and fundamentals wise, very, very good business.
I'm Patrick J. McGinnis, and I coined the term FOMO. That's short for fear of missing out, and it's why some people end up following the crowd when they should be blazing a trail of their own. But if you want to achieve greatness in business and life, you've got to break free. Come on, I'll show you how. This is FOMO Sapiens, where we explore how entrepreneurial thinkers find the inspiration and the courage to build exceptional lives. All right, welcome back to FOMO Sapiens, the show for entrepreneurial thinkers. I'm your host, Patrick J. McGinnis, and today we are talking to Anna Harman, co-founder of Studs. She launched that company with her co-founder, Lisa Bubbers, back in 2019. Now, Anna has a really interesting background. You guys are going to meet her in a second, but she began her career as an attorney after going to BU Law School. And after 4 years at Bridgewater Associates, she moved to New York City to join Fits, an in-home service that organizes your closet and edits your wardrobe. I could use that. From there, she became a director at Store Number 8, which is a standalone incubation arm within Walmart, where she focused on developing ideas and tech that would inform the future of retail. And more recently, she served as the interim chief customer officer at JetBlack, a text message-based personal shopping service. And now, of course, she's at Studs. Anna Harman, welcome to FOMO Sapiens.
Thank you so much for having me. Great to be here.
Yeah, well, you know, we're both in New York City, and I know because I hear sirens, so it's clearly clear where we are. I'm going to start, as I always do, with a question that I ask everybody, even you. And the question is this: tell me something unexpected you learned about yourself that changed everything.
I was saying to you just before we were starting this, whether I should do the funny example or the sort of relevant entrepreneurial example. So I'll give you both.
Yes.
And you can decide what you prefer.
I like them both.
The funny example is I am nearsighted in one eye and farsighted in the other. And I am thus perpetually off balance.
Whoa.
And yes. And so as a result of that, I could wear glasses or a single contact, but I find that extremely uncomfortable. So I just grin and bear it. The grinning and bearing it, I think, relates to the other thing I was going to say, which is I think the main thing that I've learned about myself, both as a function of doing Studs, but just throughout my life, is I have an incredible amount of grit, determination, sort of like, I don't know, steel under fire. And I think I really learned that at Bridgewater. And that has been very, very valuable in starting a company and in a way that I think all entrepreneurs need, and I have a lot of.
Yeah, well, they probably go together, because if you had perfectly normal eye situation, you wouldn't be as resilient as you are. And therefore, you wouldn't have responded so well to the pressure cooker that is Bridgewater.
I have somewhat mediocre vision, but I'm powering through.
Listen, do you know what my ophthalmologist told me? I actually had glasses as a high school student, and I haven't worn them since. And what I've learned is I just interpret blur really well. And you can take that and you can interpret that as you wish.
Exactly.
All right. So today we're going to be talking about your company, your journey. I want to start out, though, for folks who don't know Studs. I was telling Anna before we started that I had received a pitch for her to come on the show. And I thought, well, that's interesting. But then shortly thereafter, I went to dinner with a friend of mine who brought her daughter into the store and was raving about it. And I was like, okay, now the universe has given me the message. We got to have Anna on the show. So tell us, what is the pitch for Studs?
So Studs is an experiential ear piercing and earrings experience that we started in 2019. And the reason that we started it was I went to go get another piercing about 5 years ago now. And I went to a really premium fancy place in downtown Manhattan. And they told me I was going to wait about 2 hours and that I probably would have spent, let's call it $750.
Wow.
And I was like, that's way too expensive. And I'm definitely not waiting 2 hours to spend that much money. So I ended up going to a tattoo parlor around the corner where I had a really great piercing experience. It was done healthily and safely with a needle. I liked my piercer, but I was very personally out of place in the tattoo parlor, and the jewelry was terrible and it was still expensive. And I was sort of like, okay, that's weird. If you're me, where do you go? Both of these experiences seemed like very suboptimal. And I said, what exists that solves this problem? And the answer was nothing. And so we started Studs, my co-founder and I, out of that customer experience that I had. And the whole premise is, how do you come in? We only do ear piercing. We only pierce with needles. And you can come in, have a really consultative experience with an expert piercer, get your ears pierced in the way that you want. And then you can go and buy earrings in the stores, where we have a really wide assortment of earrings that are appropriate for people that have multiple piercings.
It's so interesting. I mean, so I don't have any piercings, and I
Never
never
say
really
never.
thought about it. Never thought about. I'm not. You never know. But I find it shocking because I don't know about this market. $700 sounds, because I just think about, like, I grew up in Maine. Like, people would either do it themselves, hopefully not, or they would like go to the mall. But it sounds like there's this weird chasm where it's either like a very, very, like, not a very nice experience in terms of the aesthetics and the experience, or it's like wicked overpriced. And you're kind of coming in with a solution that meets a lot of people in the middle. Is that a fair way to put it?
Yes, totally. And it was so interesting to us too, because we were sort of like, why has nobody done this? And we then started to go do research about, is the reason that nobody's done this that it's a fundamentally bad business, like the economics are bad or something like that.
Yeah, like airlines.
And exactly, right? Like it's complicated to get into, bad business, bad margin profile, whatever. And what we found is it's actually a great business to get into. It's just capital intensive. And so to be able to start a business like that, you have to be pretty well capitalized to do it. But margin profile wise and fundamentals wise, very, very good business.
So you're one of those people who went to law school, like my mom wanted me to do. I resisted, went to law school, and then got into the business world, which if we have lawyers listening to this show right now, which I know we do, you're all thinking, many of you are like, I want to do that too. Talk about that, because I think, moving from a legal background into the business background, it is something that you have all this training that's fantastic that you can leverage, but it is not like an easy move per se. So tell us about how you did that and what your experience was.
Sure. So, I always wanted to go to law school after college. I was a very argumentative only child. And so it sort of seemed appropriate for me personality wise. But I actually knew that maybe I wanted to practice for like a little bit, but I probably didn't want to be an attorney forever. And I loved law school academically. Like, I think the art of debate and argument construction, I'm just like very personally interested in. And so for me as an academic experience, it was wonderful. Practicing was horribly boring. I mean, truly like one of the most mind-numbing experiences that I could have had as a person in the corporate workforce. And so I made the transition about 2 years into being an attorney. And it's in some ways consistent with what I always knew that I wanted to do, which was learn to run my own business, which was part of the reason I went to Bridgewater, because at the time, Bridgewater had a management training program that I wanted to join and learn about, because I was very interested in Bridgewater culturally, and I was very interested in the principles. But I always sort of knew I wasn't going to be a lawyer for life. Interestingly, as things have evolved with Studs, my legal background is highly relevant to Studs, because Studs is a highly regulated business. And so it's been helpful in the Studs context that I was a lawyer.
Wow. And have you found, when you go out and raise capital or talk to, folks that trying to get backers or whatever, have you found that they see that background as a plus, or they're like, sometimes they're like, oh, we wish you just gone and worked at McKinsey?
I think it's sort of neither here nor there, to be honest. Like, I think it is, like I said, it is helpful in the sense that Studs is a very regulated industry. And certainly when we were starting the business, it mattered. But now I think it matters less. I think mostly people look at it and they're just like, it sort of ticks a box of generally bright person.
FOMO. It does do that. And so it also shows that you're adaptable, which was helpful for you because you launched this company in 2019, November 2019. And I hate to bring it up, I really do, but there was the pandemic. We like to make pretend it didn't happen, but it's a thing. And so you then start this business and you've got a store, and then all of a sudden pandemic happens And you can't, it's funny. I was talking just over lunch, like I learned during the pandemic that I stick to the plan, even when the circumstance changes, which is not super awesome. That was like a thing I learned about myself that was surprising, that changed everything. How did you adapt to that huge headwind to your business, which was like, it's like you're getting up in somebody's ear when you're giving them a piercing? What'd you do?
Yeah. So we had launched the company 4 months before COVID and in like November of 2019. And we had just raised our Series A end February 2020, which was so lucky in retrospect.
Wow.
And yeah, it was unbelievable. And 2 weeks later, we had 2 stores at the time, both had to close. And the first thing that we did was, which was very hard because I think, obviously remember the period of time where everyone was like, this is just going to be 2 weeks.
Yeah, that was
right?
me for like the first 6 months.
It'll be over 2 weeks from now.
Yeah.
I didn't have an opinion actually about how long it was going to be. I was just operating purely out of the necessity of like preserve the capital you just raised.
Okay.
Because you don't exactly know how you're going to be able to deploy it. And the whole point of the money is to be able to grow. And so in some ways, both the luck of having closed that financing as well as this like instinctive, Anna, you can't like burn money over the next indefinite period of time and thus not be able to grow, made me very decisive with the company about like what to do. Like we closed really quickly. We furloughed really quickly. For a period of time, it was back to me and my co-founder, Lisa, alone. I was the customer service agent for quite some time, right? Like we operated, I think, very sort of clearly out of like, how do we preserve capital to start the business whenever it is that we can start the business again? Because while we knew it likely wasn't 2 weeks, we also knew it wasn't likely 17 years, right? But that money, that pot of money was critical for us to be able to be successful whenever we could be in the future. And so I was sort of like, how do we control everything we're doing to optimize for keeping that pot of money as big as possible?
Yeah. It's really important. And I think, I've talked about this a lot on the show with many guests who've either raised capital or investors. It's like when you raise money, if you do not deploy that money in a way that shows, either proves out your model or grows the business, like that's it. You're not, maybe in the crazy times, the last 10 years, like you had a little bit more leeway. Nowadays, those days are done. And so to be really smart about controlling that burn rate, that's a real pro move. And in that time, again, you knew the world was, it's like, eventually going to come back probably, but that is such an important lesson for anybody to learn. And of course, what happens is a lot of your competitors who don't get that message disappear. And then you own the market.
Right. And so, and then from a customer's perspective, I think we spent a lot of time sort of worrying and having sleepless nights about like, would people come back to get pierced? Because getting pierced is not like, going to the dentist or going to the doctor. These things you sort of have to do coming out of lockdowns. And we were lucky because I think not only did people want to come back, but they were so eager to like get out and do a thing that they came back really quickly and the business was sort of off to the races again, which was great.
Now, you have raised venture capital from firms like Thrive and Spark and Alera, Hippo, and folks like that. And one thing we all know about the VCs, gotta love the VCs, the VC game, it's the game. But they love, what VCs love to say? Oh, not a big enough market. Oh, I love your business. Like we had the founder, Kate Ryder of Maven, which is women's healthcare. Huge company. You know what they said to her? Oh, we're not sure that's a big enough market. It's like women's healthcare people. And it's oftentimes you're sitting at a table with Tad and Brad and Thad, who all went to Dartmouth together and don't know anything about your industry anyway. And I hate to pick on people, but it's true. Okay. So you're coming in, Anna, with like, I was happy to tell you that I know nothing about it too, but like, I'm sure I don't think I'm going on a limb here to say that you probably heard from investors who were like, oh, that's nice. Like, but that's a one product company, not scalable, blah, 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 regulated, all this sort of stuff. How did you've raised a lot of money. How did you get people over the hump?
So it's funny that you say that. So let's call it Chad. To this day, we encounter the people that believe the TAM isn't big enough and thought that the TAM wasn't big
Total
enough
addressable
then,
market,
right?
everybody. TAM, total addressable
Yes,
market.
total addressable market. Sorry for the,
No. It's
arcane and
good.
somewhat silly terms.
We love our
Um,
terms.
and, we still get that, right? And I
Yeah.
think I'll say there were two different camps of people. And then also, I think a key thing that happened that helped. One camp of people was like, small TAM, is this a trend or a fad that people are getting pierced? Like, this is just a women's thing, blah, 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 blah. The other camp of people, some of whom were women, but frankly, many of whom were men, were like, oh my God, this should exist. Why doesn't this exist? It's like Warby. It's a modernized version of a thing that exists and is a very big business, right? And I think it really helped us to point to there are two major mall brands, right? One is Claire's and the other is this business, Banter by Piercing Pagoda, which is owned by Signet. Claire's has 1,400 stores in North America. Claire's does over $1 billion in top line. And Banter by Piercing Pagoda, over 300 stores. I don't know what they're doing now. At the time, was doing a little north of 300 million in top line, right? And so it was helpful for us to be able to point to those as evidence of the market size,
Yep.
right? Like we were like, this is a big business because these businesses in these legacy spaces exist already.
That is, it's interesting. Just like when you tell me that, again, like I'm like, Claire's, I thought that went bankrupt. Like, didn't Apollo buy that and put it out of business? So it's just, and then the other one, like Piercing Pagoda, like the brand doesn't make you want to part with much money. It's just interesting. So yeah, you have this kind of creaky market with a huge opportunity to come in and do something different. So talk about, you talked about experiential. And we've had this season, we had the founders of Slumu Institute. I don't know if you've ever been down there, which is this amazing experience that then has a beautiful product. It's a really super thing. And what I loved about that episode was we talked about what it means to walk into their space. So talk about how do you delight your customer? How do you make it special for your customer when they walk into the store? And by the way, full disclosure, as I was saying before, I walked by your store in Georgetown over the weekend and it did stop me. I was like, what is that place? And then I was like, oh, we're going to be talking next week. So talk about that.
Yeah, so I think that starts with the design and what it looks like from outside of the space. And so Lisa, my co-founder, is responsible for all things about studs that are cool. I make studs functional. Lisa made studs cool and inviting in a place you wanted to go into. And I think she really started from the place of, one, how do you make a store that looks really different than other stores?
Yeah.
To start with, and from a materials palette and a color and the use of neon and how she thought about lighting, that was sort of her base inception point. How do I make this look really different, feel exciting and inviting? The other thing is, we often say like it's supposed to be sort of like Chic Medi Spa-esque, right? It's a place where you feel like it's clean. It feels sort of like a fancy doctor's office. You get the impression that it's safe and sterile because it is safe and sterile, right? And then simultaneously, there's lots of moments where you can take content of yourself, you can take a selfie, you can take videos of yourself with your friends. And how do you sort of meld those two things together in a way that feels like, oh, I want to go in here and it does feel like a place that's appropriate to get my ears pierced, but it's also fun.
And I know you have a marketing kind of mindset that is about, you just mentioned, for example, creating moments where people can share to social, which is super smart and super 2020, 2020s. But you also have done partnerships with beloved brands like Shake Shack and BravoCon, which I actually don't partake in either, but I know they're loved. And then, some influencers. So like, how do you make those choices? Like, what is your guiding light on who to partner with and how to use those partnerships to drive the buzz?
Yeah, it's funny. This is sort of like, maybe this is like a little about studs, but we think a lot about how do we actually, instead of like trying to make noise ourselves, how do we join noise that other people have already made, right? And so part of the reason we wanted to we have a studs piercing trailer that we call Studs on Wheels. It is a mobile piercing trailer like a truck, right? The reason we brought it to BravoCon is because BravoCon has 30,000 incredibly intense fans who are obsessed with Bravo and obsessed with the Bravo celebrities and all of the reality TV franchises that Bravo produces. And Studs just gets to ride Bravo's coattails, right? Like they made the Zeitgeist event and we just need to show up and then we get to be part of that conversation, right? And so I think a lot of that is sort of also having like a little bit of the humbleness to understand that like Studs is not supreme and that isn't the point, right? The point is how do you get into the right conversation? And if that's by tagging along with a much bigger brand, that's okay.
It's totally okay. What it takes is really knowing who your customer is. So like,
yes, and our customer is obsessed with Bravo,
right? Which is why I'm not your customer quite yet. Now, that might all change, but I get it. Like, and so when you have somebody who loves something, and you can be there when they're there, and associate yourselves with a brand that's positive, that is huge, and that throws a halo onto your brand, like. It's kind of a no-brainer. It just takes thought and it takes creativity. And I think a lot of people forget, right? We're in an age now where it was so easy to just target people on the internet for so long that they stopped thinking about like, oh, people actually leave their homes and exist in the real world. And so how can we meet them where they are to create an in-person touch point?
Totally. And for me, there was this partner, I can't remember his name, Andrew something at Andreessen, that wrote this sort of like seminal paper in early 2000 that's called The Law of Shitty Click-Throughs. And I love the paper because it's basically about how all advertising platforms sort of inevitably degrade through time.
Yeah.
Right? And that you are sitting there being like, when I first saw a banner ads really worked, but then banner ads became a true disaster, right? By like the mid 2010s, let's say. And I think about that a lot when I think about Studs' marketing, because I'm sitting there trying to be like, what actually gets people to pay attention, right? And often that's about things that people are preternaturally disposed to pay attention to that may be independent of Studs. And like I said, Studs just needs to join into.
Yeah, it's true. Now, I want to ask you one final question before we get to the lightning round, which is, retail. They say retail is detail. Okay, I know we all know that bit, but it's also about, so you're creating this nice experience that, has a lot of elements to it. And a big part of that is the people. And especially after the pandemic, we all know that like finding and retaining people has been extraordinarily difficult across retail. And so what are you doing? Like, what is your approach to finding and retaining people that are able to deliver the kind of experience you want for your customer?
So I would say we do two key things. One is we train all of our piercers in-house. We run an apprenticeship program. We pay people to be apprentices at Studs, so they are paid to learn to become piercers. And I think that leads to incredibly good outcomes, both in terms of we obviously can control the content that they're getting as part of their training. They're learning how to pierce in the Studs way and what the Studs hospitality experience is like, et cetera, et cetera. But also I think it's really exciting for them because many of these people wanted to become piercers, and the traditional model of apprenticeship was to sort of go and hang around a tattoo parlor, totally unpaid for God knows how long, and then sort of hope it worked out, right? So I think we created a career path for people to become piercers in a way that's beneficial to our business, but also very beneficial to them, right? I think the second thing is I have a real, coming out of Bridgewater as part of both my own sort of ethos and values, and also how I think we should work as a company. I have a real open door policy, and I hear a lot of feedback, and that feedback is sometimes great and sometimes terrible, right? And you have to be willing to listen all the time and actually, I think, engage with the people that are delivering value for the company every single day. That doesn't mean you'll always agree with them, right? And it doesn't mean they'll always agree with you. But I think that what often happens in retail companies is like corporate becomes very disconnected from the field. And I've purposely tried for myself to maintain really connected and really open door and sort of overly feedback oriented in order to hear, because of course, like it's not a perfect job. Nobody should be confused that it is.
Yeah. And it's, we've had our friend Marshall Goldsmith, who's a, author, coach, total rock star, come on the show twice now. And he talks about this idea of give forward, which is that people in positions of power, everybody around them stops giving them feedback. because they're like, oh, this is a boss. Look, I'm not going to, rustle. And so if you create a culture in which you thank everybody for their feedback, even if it may be junk feedback, but you say, thank you for that information. I will. And then you do what but having a culture like that, especially in an entrepreneurial organization, can be tremendous. FOMO. Okay. That is, thank you for that insight. Now we're going to move on to the lightning round. We got 4 questions for you. Quick answers. Are you ready to go?
I'm ready.
All right. No pressure. Number 1. What is a favorite quote?
What doesn't kill you makes you stronger.
That's a good one. I like that. An old classic. Number 2. What is one book or podcast that every FOMO Sapiens should know about?
I want to say Pivot with Scott Galloway and Kara Swisher, but I feel like it's a little tried and true. I will say for the reality TV fans out there, obviously you are not one of them, but I'm loving the Vile Files lately. It's a really good breakdown of all things reality TV.
I don't even know what that is, but okay. You know what? Scott Galloway has been on this show. We love Scott, so it's okay. And Kara went to Georgetown, so we love her too. All right. Number 3, one piece of advice you give to your younger self.
Be less stressed out in your 20s about what you're going to do with your career.
Oh, yeah, because guess what? You won't even know when you're in your 40s, so just accept it.
Totally, and I feel like everybody thinks that they have to have made it by their 27th birthday, and I'm like, it's so unlikely for most people.
Probably if you did, it's because you're fooling yourself. Not to be negative. And final one, what's your most important memory?
It's funny, people often ask me if I was sort of like, if they think that I was born to do this or whatever. And I was like, you think I was born to like run an ear piercing business? But when I was very little, I set up a store in my room. I was an only child. I am an only child. And I would sell my parents back all of the toys that they had bought me. So I view myself as like a retailer through and through from my early years.
Wow. I love that. You know what? We used to have yard sales and I wouldn't sell my toys because I gave them emotions and was afraid they'd be upset. You, on the other hand.
Yeah, I'm more mercenary than
That's
you,
amazing.
apparently.
I like that. All right, everybody. So you can go check out Studs. There are stores all over the country in the United States. You can find them on social at Studs. You can buy online. Anna Harman, co-founder of Studs. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks so much.
FOMO. If you like today's show, please be sure to rate it and recommend it to your friends. And as always, you can find me on Instagram at Patrick J. McGinnis, on Twitter at PJ McGinnis, and on the web at FOMOSapiens.com or PatrickMcGinnis.com, where you can get all kinds of free resources to live a more decisive and entrepreneurial life. FOMO Sapiens is recorded in New York City. Theme music is by Mike McGinnis, and editing and post-production is by Josh Elstro. If you like today's show, please be sure to rate it and recommend it to your friends. And as always, you can find me at FOMOSapiens.com and at PatrickMcGinnis.com. To advertise on FOMO Sapiens, reach out to contact@FOMOSapiens.com.